It's a game changer for people. And in like, I don't know, it's a very high percent of the cases that we deal with. The compliance person is usually very process oriented, very organized, but they're inheriting something else. So they're trying to get their arms around something, and then when they get to this, this is usually where we have our big breakthrough moment. Okay. I think Roya was going to join. I think this is valuable internally as it is externally. See a familiar name on there, Eric Gill. How are you?
I am doing good. How about yourself?
I'm good. We were all just commiserating about our weather.
Oh, really? You are somewhere in Tennessee, right?
Yeah, well, the company's in Tennessee. I happen to be in New England, so it's a little colder up here.
Oh, okay. Definitely colder over there.
Griff, what's your weather today?
I think I would say like it's really sunny, which is nice, but it's still cool, but it's nice to be outside. Probably like 45 outside. That's how it felt. So that's a guesstimate. Let me check though.
We're 45 here, so same temperature.
Yeah, it's about 40, 45 outside, but the sun makes it feel a lot better.
I wonder how much like people like yourself Ted pay for electricity like out in that area.
Eric, our electric rates are higher, so the kilowatt charge for residents here is probably 26 cents a kilowatt, which is really high, because Tennessee, a kilowatt delivered is about 13 cents to 17.
Wow.
So it's a significant difference. The big difference is a lot more energy efficient homes here.
But you guys don't have the need to turn on your air conditioning, do you?
We use air conditioning a lot in the summer, dehumidifying primarily. It's an interesting challenge, balancing the energy cost. Tennessee probably has the best energy cost in the United States for commercial manufacturing companies.
And probably you guys use up a lot of electricity in the winter, keeping your homes warm, right?
We're gas, so primarily we don't have much in the way of electric heat in New England, so it's almost all gas.
Yes, okay.
So it's kind of balanced out, and a lot of our utilities run energy efficiency programs. Everybody in the state benefits. You just have to call the utility, get a home audit, and if your insulation, for instance, isn't very good, for free, they'll come out and insulate your entire home.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Energy saving light bulbs, free. There's a lot of things that balance it out. You still have to pay the bill, but Tennessee is still less expensive. But the efficiency factor here is much higher.
Gotcha.
All right. It's a small group. We're going to jump right into it. Guys, this is a deeply geeky topic, but it is incredibly important. It's the crux of almost all successful outcomes. So I'll let you guys mute and unmute yourselves. I won't control any of that honor system. And we're just going to jump right in. There are 15 slides, and you can ask for these afterwards. If you're wondering what an asset-centric strategy is and what's the alternative is a maintenance-centric strategy. It's very hard to run a maintenance-centric strategy successfully. So we're going to talk about assets and being asset-focused and asset-centric. All right, so we're going to start right here. I'm going to give you guys a second to read the right column. I'll draw your attention to the wording there. It's important to note that every activity occurs against the asset. Seems obvious. However, in most cases, the companies that are trying to deliver on compliance are tracking service events.
You're not sharing it.
Screen.
Yeah, I can't see the screen.
Oh, hold on. It says I'm sharing, so let's fix that. Sorry about that. Tell me when you can see it.
Got it now.
I see it, Ted.
All right, wonderful. I just had to reshare. Sorry about that. Okay, so there are 15 slides. I'm going to go through them quickly and share this with you guys afterwards. But to reiterate what I just said, service-based compliance means you're tracking service events, you're looking at various service events, and you're piecing them together. That is incredibly difficult to do. Asset-based, asset-centric compliance is everything is tethered to the asset. The service events, the work orders, the leak rates, the reporting, energy, it says depreciation there, but it means to say depreciation, my apologies. Installing, shutdowns, performance, everything's against the asset. Look, the only constant will be someday, Eric, you and I won't be working on this, right? But another generation of people will be. And what will they inherit from us, right? That's the thinking process is, will we pass along a great service event process? Likely. But if we can pass along the integrity to track assets well, then all of those other things will fall into place for them. All right. Compliance, open mic is all about it being an open mic, not me preaching. Stop me at any time. These are just a few of the items that we felt visually would help you get an indication, or share this with your team. Like, hey, why did I just take 30 or 40 minutes out of my day? Well, because we want to talk about the difference between an asset-centric versus a service event-centric compliance program. All right. Not a word you probably hear every day, taxonomy. Anyone here want to share any thoughts on taxonomy, or let me dive right in? Going once, twice. Taxonomy is a classification system for your assets. Your HVACR assets are very different than your, let's say, vertical lift assets, right? And a lot of times you'll be working in a work order system, or you'll be in a maintenance CMMS system that's got a number of attributes. Like, here are 30 attributes, and they're the same for all appliances. Well, that's going to lead to a lot of trouble, particularly in the compliance world, because we have to really protect these attributes. We have to make sure we're capturing the right data at the right time from the right person. So we want to create a taxonomy, something that's very structured. These attributes are connected to HVACR appliances. We have an expanded list of attributes maybe that apply to refrigeration, and a different one that applies to comfort cooling versus process cooling. All right, so these are each different. And we want to create a really tight structure there. And you don't want to just allow anybody to add or remove assets. This really is a result of having a very well-developed asset taxonomy structure. Does anyone have any questions about asset taxonomy? Because it's really the most important part of this, although it's a big word and kind of boring.
No questions.
Okay. Last thing I will tell you is, oftentimes we'll see, and I'm going to give an example, a brand new HVAC, let's say, split unit installed. And the question becomes, which is the parent in that relationship? Is it the condenser? Is it the evaporator inside? Does it have multiple evaporators? This is where that taxonomy logic will really help clear the way for answering that question. All right, next one. Inclusive, exclusive, it's all about setting standards here. You want to be very specific about each attribute, and you do not want to provide a lot of flexibility, but you do want to provide some flexibility as long as it's structured. So what this means is maybe your serial and model numbers, that's pretty universal across all appliances. Now we're going to start to get into very specific things like asset types, So not just comfort cooling, but chiller. Maybe it's not a chiller, maybe it's an air conditioning unit or a split unit of a different type, or self-contained units versus units that have multiple parts to it. Very important to know what those are, create really specific terminology for that, and then deploy that and have a process to manage changes to it. You know, it's very common here. We get lots of calls. Someone will say, would you mind updating that record for me? And we don't mind at all. The problem is updating the record will have other repercussions. And here, updating a record oftentimes means going back to ownership. It also might mean talking to ownership's asset steward, right? A steward, we're going to get to that in a second, is a very important part of this. But it all revolves around creating some type of governance around the standards. All right. So an asset steward, one of the most important people in our lives. Here at TrackRef, we've got Steve Ehrlich. He's got a lot of experience. He is usually our frontline asset steward guy. He oversees the records, makes sure that there's no gaps. And oftentimes when we get records from people, we're the first time anyone's evaluated these records for integrity. So Steve is our asset steward, and he makes sure before this data makes it into TrackRef that it's aligned, it's as close to accurate as we can ascertain, and that there is a structured set of attributes that are collected for each, let's call it each category of material or category of equipment. And this really, we consider it to be the start of success. It doesn't matter. The TrackRef software is pretty much useless, and I'll be honest, sounds terrible if we have bad data. And it wouldn't matter if it was TrackRef or IBM. If you put bad data in here, anybody puts bad data in here, and the information's wrong. For instance, you catalog an appliance as refrigeration, but it should be comfort cooling. Or you've listed it as 49 pounds instead of 65. You know, we all think of this trigger rate of 49 pounds. We have to stay under 49 pounds because that's the number the EPA cares about. That type of trigger undermines a lot of ability for owners and managers to make changes to assets. I'm going to share an example of that in a second. But before we get there, does anyone know of an asset steward, or is anyone, Steve, you probably never thought of yourself as an asset steward if you're out there listening, but that's what you are.
Have been for a long time.
There you go. Does anyone have any questions on the stewardship or role of the asset steward? How important that is?
It's my first time learning about this term, so it's nice to get this information.
I've been a steward for 30 years plus, but I didn't know I was called a steward. I just was always cared about getting the right data. I never called myself a steward, so that's a new word for me too.
Well, yeah, I mean, identity is important throughout this, right? Because what ends up happening is oftentimes when we get a large amount of data, it's legacy data, and the data is, yeah, Steve, I think you just mumbled trash. It's pretty bad. And so what we have to do is make sure, is the charge right? Oftentimes we'll see those numbers wrong. Is the category correct? Is the serial and model number data correct? And that's usually wrong. The rails, it's very hard to keep the train on the rails if you don't have good information to start with. All right. Set standards. This asset steward should be the person that everybody defers to. For instance, on our team, if Steve says this appliance has these attributes and this is important, he's where the buck stops. And we know that he's done his research before he says that. And we've been through tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of asset uploads. And that knowledge continues to improve. And then the next thing you want to be able to do is have an escalation policy. Not everyone's able to change the assets. Who can change them? Why? What are they changing? This documentation trail is critical to success. And I have an example on the next page or 2 pages away. But you also want to know, where will the documents be kept? What is the source of truth? You know, oftentimes when we work with a work order system or a CMMS system, you know, they'll say that they're the source of truth. When we see the information that they can edit, we know that that is not going to be a great place for us to start or stop. So we pay respect to the data, but we filter that before we bring it into TrackRef. And we're incredibly diligent about that process. And if there is going to be a change, we want to know what's motivating the change. And then you want to have good documentation for that as well. Sometimes we've seen site audits that are so notoriously horrible. I have seen grocers, I have seen property owners, Steve, you've seen the same thing, spend millions of dollars sending teams of people into the field, write down all the asset information and document it. The worst one I ever received in my life came from a very large, nationally known, very well-respected grocer, and not one refrigerant charge or refrigerant type on the audit. Hundreds and hundreds, nearly 1,000 locations, not one refrigerant charge or refrigerant type. The data was useless to us. They weren't alone. There was another grocer who had just under that number, just about almost double that in almost double in total assets. They rushed to get a team out into the field. That team was very fast. They got it in 7 months. They did almost 2,000 locations. And at the end of the day, the data was useless. Lots of tags sold, lots of coffee drank, lots of data recorded, but none of it useful for compliance. Yeah. So in our experience, couldn't highlight this more. It's in red for a reason. Third-party companies are highly unreliable because they're not accountable when a conflict comes up later on.
Well, they wouldn't hire an air conditioning person because they cost too much. That was part of the problem. They hired people that had never hugged a chiller before. You hire non-chiller huggers, you're going to get crap.
Yep, Steve's a chiller hugger. Can also tell he's a language scholar. Kidding, Steve. All right.
Military man.
Asset principles to consider. There's business principles, technical principles, documentation principles, and classification. Business principles are things related to depreciation and the value of the asset, right? And what's happening to it. Retrofit. Does it have subsystems? Mapping. Technical is going to be the things that I just mentioned. How does the parent-child relationship work? How do these things look on paper versus how do they look in the real world? We get one question we get asked all the time. I saved it to the end, but I wrote it down for the end, but I'm going to start it now. If you are an appliance owner in Southern California and you have a Seasons 4 3-circuit unit, you want to ask yourself, is it possible for me to retrofit one circuit at a time with a different refrigerant? If that's the case, although normally we would advocate that you put that all together in one parent system with 3 individual subsystems, if you're in Southern California, we would tell you not to do that because you have to file with AQMD. And when you're filing with AQMD, if you retrofit that refrigerant, you have to record that separately with the AQMD office in South Coast. So what that means is 2 units might be on R407A and the 3rd unit might be on 448. That possibility means you want to record that as 3 different units, circuit 1, circuit 2, and circuit 3. Not normally something you would have to do or that we would even advise, but if you're in Southern California, you don't have a choice. Steve, you want to mention anything on that?
There's no way you're going to have a 3-circuit unit and use 2 different refrigerants.
Yeah, but in those seasons 4, they have 3 circuits in them. I see it happen almost all the time now. Where
Yeah, almost all your Munters units, your Seasons 4 units, your Train units, most all HVAC rooftops that are of any size are going to have multiple circuits. And they need to be entered that way so that we get the proper circuit charge information.
Right, but I'm saying right now one of the things that we're having to do in Southern California is redo some of those comfort.
Yeah, because they combined the total of the charge. They didn't break the circuits out. That's what the problem is.
Exactly. It's a mess. But it's important to consider it. If you're the asset steward or you have the asset steward responsibility or you're on the asset stewardship team, you need to bring these thinking processes to the people that you're working with because they're not going to think about that.
A lot of times the HVAC manufacturers made all the circuits under 50 pounds to stay under these thresholds for the state and the feds. So that's what a lot of, I'll see charges 90 pounds for the main HVAC. And I'm going, no, it's probably 2 45-pound circuits, but no one gave you that information.
Well, and there's even more to think about there. You bring up a good point. Retrofits are really changing the charge of the units. I mean, you might have an R22 unit that you retrofitted to 407C, and it might have been a 39-pound charge or 35-pound charge in that circuit, but you're going to find that the 407C, you're now up to 54 pounds in that circuit. And so that changes everything. And we're going to see this happen a lot, specifically in California over the next 3 years, because we're going to retrofit pretty much every air conditioning system in the country to 448 or some 4 series derivative over the next 5 to 7 years. And each time you make that retrofit, it changes the installed capacity of the unit. That installed capacity is based on that refrigerant. We no longer live in a world where refrigerants will start their life, or a system will start its life with one refrigerant and end it with the same refrigerant. It's very likely that every single AC unit will see 2, if not 3 generations of refrigerants before that work is done. So that's really something you've got to consider. Okay, here's an example. This just came up this week. A refrigeration system adjusted from 49 to 60 pounds. A 5-pound leak on the unit, 10.2%. Okay. After the adjustment was made to 60 pounds, the new leak rate was 8.3%. Technically, this client was a little bit stressed out because the contractor, when they made, we had to go back and find the paperwork, the contractor hadn't recorded any of this because it was an under 50-pound system. And what made them have to change this to 60 pounds, and by the way, I love this story, it's an R22 unit, was the contractor insisted they were putting 2 30-pound cylinders into the unit. Even though very likely the contractor never fully put 2 30-pound systems in, or 2 30-pound bottles, that's what we had to change the charge capacity to for them. But in the end, you still needed the leak rates because now the unit was over 50 pounds. So what I like to encourage everyone to think here is, yes, the EPA's threshold may be 49 pounds, but there are 2 things that have turned out to be facts. Number one, every piece of equipment gets a field adjusted charge no matter who made it or where it came from. And that field adjusted charge is only relevant for that one material type. That's one fact. The second fact is, in this heightened state of awareness about refrigerants, now we're starting to see a lot more retrofits of AC units. Now, we couldn't retrofit from 22 to 410, but we can retrofit from 410 to 448 or 456 or 436 or any one of those materials, and that is going to change the charge capacity of that unit. Now, I spent well over an hour this week with a regulator in Southern California explaining to them that this system charge adjustment should not impact that person's compliance success. I don't know if I was successful or not, to be honest, because they took it under advisement. But what we encourage people to do, and a lot of our clients do it now, is they find a threshold that works for them. Maybe 49 pounds is too close to that 50 number. So maybe it's 35. The most common number we're seeing these days is 25. So people are working on or applying systems to record service 25 pounds and over. And by the way, the people that are dealing with this are not people that, like Steve, would call themselves an asset steward, but they're doing asset steward roles. And you can Google asset stewardship afterwards. You'll get a lot of interesting information. The United Kingdom, specifically England, has done more with this topic than any other country in the world. You'll find a lot of fantastic information there. And I can even help if you need any, but it's a really useful place to get data. All right, recommendations. Develop an asset taxonomy and hierarchy structure. Incredibly important. Stick to your guns, be disciplined, be structured, and be specific. 2, implement an end-to-end capture process. Be detailed. We want an install process. We want a shutdown process on any asset over this weight. We want to record shutdowns on any system under this weight. A lot of people might skip an install, but I really encourage everyone to record the shutdowns, okay? One of the requirements in California is something known as California Environmental Reporting System. And under that reporting structure, if your on-site cumulative amount of refrigerant go over 1,000 cubic feet, you have to report. And then if you go under 1,000 cubic feet, maybe you shut something down or sold something or just, mothballed it, you then can request an allowance to go under the threshold, but you have to provide the documentation. So at least if you have some type of trigger point that you're comfortable with and you know where this data is going to be used, that'll help you create some type of threshold to manage. Assign an asset steward or steward.
Ted, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain mothball to me?
Mothballed is a temporary shutdown of an appliance.
Or permanent.
Not in California. Mothballed is temporary. You're
Oh.
expected to not have it mothballed more than 90 days. They can do seasonal shutdowns, but
It's different.
yeah, you got to be careful with that terminology, Eric. It's like Steve said, we would both answer that a little differently.
In the leak rate rules, they give you a check. You can't fix the leak and you can't get the parts. They allow you to take the refrigerant out of the circuit that's leaking, which mothballs it temporarily. It stops the clock, the leak clock, because there's no more leaks. You took the refrigerant out. You're waiting for the new parts to arrive. Once you get the new parts, then you reinstall the refrigerant and finish the leak repairs, and then you're back up and running. That's a temporary mothball. Sometimes you'll have a rooftop unit or chiller or something that you're going to instead of disposing of it, you don't want to get a crane to pull it off the roof or out of its location. It might be in a basement you can't get at without cutting it up. So they just pull the refrigerant out, disconnect all the electrical. It's dead for the rest of its life, but it's stuck in that building. And that's a permanent mothball disposal, shutdown.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you have to record it that way, Eric. So you can't just leave it status as mothball. It would have to then change to shut down, retired, or
decommissioned,
destroyed, that type of thing.
Never can. A temporary mothballed system can be started up again. A permanently mothballed system, there's no way you can start it up again. Things are cut out of it, parts are stolen from it, or put into the parts bin for it. It's end of life, gone, done. But it's physically still in the location due to the cost of removing it.
Thank you for that information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Steve. So the next thing is it's not doable by system owners alone. I don't care if you're JLL, Cushman Wakefield, CBRE, Albertsons, Kroger. It doesn't matter where you are. The service team, the people that are doing the work, are the eyes and ears of the people in the office responsible for both the record keeping and the reporting. Problem is we have to build trust between the two parties. We can't just be adding assets or skipping steps. And so that needs to be really well communicated in a set of policies that both groups can agree to. I see very little in the way of policy sharing between owners, operators, and their service providers. And it's one of the most important elements of operationalizing your compliance program. And the last thing, which is going to seem really out of touch with everything else, because we are talking about asset-centric, is making sure the data is fresh. Accurate and timely is key. I know I keep saying fresh data. People have been asking me, what does that mean? It means data that's been entered in 48 hours. Think of it like this. How long would you keep a piece of fish before you used it? And if you can't use that piece of fish in that window of time, 3 days, then that's when those service tickets should be in. No service ticket should outlast the length that a piece of fish can last in your fridge. And we live by that. And what this does is it means that if you find bad information, you're going to have to communicate it. If you're the field service guy, you show up, you scan that asset, your record says 407A, TrackRef says R22, that's an immediate, I need help. There should be a button that says, I want to report a conflict. We have it in TrackRef. It's in the mobile app. Hit a little button, and you're immediately, your record is submitted, and it's out of your hands at that point. And so the more often people do that, the less bad the data will be. January and February are awfully stressful months. They're just terrible. We've got owners, operators reconciling invoices. We've got service people that may have entered records against assets that may have changed, but they didn't document it. Thousands of conflicts would be conservative. It's more likely tens of thousands of conflicts. We get involved as much as we can, but oftentimes we don't have any better data than the other people in the office. So fresh data is key. Anyone have any questions on this?
No.
Guys, that is really it. That's everything. And I just jammed about 2 hours of discussions into 30 minutes. So if you've got any questions, happy to answer them. Let's see. Eric, you've been about asking questions.
You slow jammed the HVAC.
I what?
You slow jammed the HVAC news.
I don't know about.
She said.
A little sharing of pop culture terms might help us both on that one.
They remember Lion Brian Williams used to slow jam the news on Jimmy on the Tonight, but after he laid off, they quit that.
Look, there are tons of conflicts between owners, operators, and service people, and we're always trying to figure the answer out in a scalable way. So if you don't feel comfortable asking the questions today, hit the support button in TrackRef and ask us. We'll share this slide deck with you guys afterwards. But the principles are all built into TrackRef, but this presentation today or discussion or open mic wasn't just about TrackRef clients. It's really for anybody that's having the responsibility to deliver on compliance. All right. So I answered one of my own questions earlier about, the circuits. I have another one that I was going to ask myself, just in case Steve didn't ask it of me. But we get this call a lot. I have an appliance. It's listed as air conditioning or comfort cooling, and I need you to change it to refrigeration. Steve, what would you tell people in that situation?
I'd ask them for the model to remember the type of thing. What is it doing? What is its end use? Does it look like a refrigerator? Does it quack like a duck?
Well, refrigeration in the federal government's definition is very specific to anything that's cooling food. and it has a specific leak rate also. And there are specific reporting requirements around it, as well as recording requirements. And so what we would tell somebody, Steve's right, he would start with those questions, but we would then say, okay, fantastic. We need to see the service records on this appliance for at least a year, if not 3. And then we need to know why it was miscategorized from the beginning. And then we need to make sure that we didn't underreport any of the information that was required from us.
What?
Huh?
Well, it's straightforward. If they're trying to change it from air conditioning to refrigeration, what's the refrigerant type? That can tip you off right there. If it's an air conditioning refrigeration, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. If it's 410A, you want to change it to refrigeration, I'm going, why? It's not allowed to be 410A as a refrigerant. So, in other words, we've got to ask more questions. What is it doing? What heat is it what's it removing heat from? That's the next question.
See, we have an angry asset steward. It's very helpful. We just send him out after people. Then they never ask any questions again. They just live in fear. So yeah, a lot goes into that change.
Yeah, it's more or less I see a lot of air conditioning systems at 410A, R22, 407C that have been listed as refrigeration, knowing that that's not an approved EPA refrigerant for refrigeration applications.
Yep.
So yeah.
Let's see.
Everything's different. You just got to ask all the right questions before you make the change.
Hey, Steve, is that based off of square footage or just not allowed for refrigeration period?
Well, no, I want to know what is the, there's no such, it's not cooling. It's you're removing heat from something. What are you removing the heat from? Are you running it through a fan? Is it hooked up to a walk-in box? What is it? That's kind of the questions sometimes you grab people off guard. You're both looking at something in a computer screen, but now I want to know in the real world, what is it doing? Why are you making this change? If you're sitting up on the roof looking at a bunch of condensing units up on a roof, I can tell the difference between an HVAC system and a refrigeration system. But that's because I've been around that stuff for 40 some years. But somebody else that's up there, they can't tell the difference, right? So I just ask a lot of questions. But if you don't see where the lines go on the other end, you don't have any other source of information because you don't know how to go find the building plans and walk through it to see what was scoped out ahead of time. Or if it's really old building, then you're probably not going to have anything that's an as-built anyway.
Sometimes we get lucky and see the as-built, and that really can help. Some newer companies or universities or research centers or data centers fall into a couple of very gray areas with some of this equipment, Paul. It should be straightforward, but the way it's been categorized is usually to help the owner operator stay under some threshold, which then leads to other issues. And so that complicates it a lot. And maybe we did inherit some data, or the user inherited some data. And then the question becomes, what should you have done if that were a different type of appliance last year versus this year? We see retrofits that were misrecorded. That happens a lot in grocery. We see, larger systems at more conventional buildings are much easier. But I will definitely say that some of the appliances that we get that are mislabeled should never have been labeled, like Steve said, the way they were.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Paul?
To an extent. I guess where I was going with, if somebody grabs a little area of their warehouse, say, for example, a delivery service, and they want to hold, pharmaceuticals or something else in there at a certain temperature, and they just take one of the rooftops that they've got and throw, a 10 by 10 structure inside the warehouse to cool it and use that 410 system to do that. I know refrigerants are banned by the EPA for refrigeration use, but if it's under a set amount of square footage, would that 410A still be allowed to do that?
Once something's out of production, I get into arguments with the pharmaceuticals all the time. Once it's like if it's something that has to be kept cool, and you're doing what you just said, I've seen that happen lots of times. But it's comfort cooling or other refrigeration as it used to be. But that other refrigeration tag kind of fell out in this last round of regulatory changes. It kind of disappeared from the they just say other cooling, but they don't really address it like they had in the previous CFRs and the Federal Register. But it's just, it's comfort cooling. You can call it that, but it's still 410A. So you're not in conflict with SNAP, right? SNAP doesn't know. So yeah, it
was also 410 was originally developed by Honeywell for refrigeration, but it couldn't get past ASHRAE for that. It technically should have ended up as a 5 series refrigerant in the 90s, but it was really fought. So as a result, Honeywell had to find something for it. They got a home at Carrier for a long time until it was, adopted at a bigger scale later on. But definitely 410 can achieve those lower temperatures.
Yeah.
It definitely can.
But, and it doesn't really change because that unit was produced in wherever it was, and reported to AHRI as a comfort cooling type system, right? Even though you're just changing it, you're not cooling people anymore. You're cooling post-production product or pre-production, elements that go into stuff. Because I had like my cookie makers that have to keep their sugar in one room, same thing. They got to keep the sugar dry and cool, and coffee beans, same thing before you grind them up. But
Paul, Eric, we've reached our 45 minutes. We're at the 2-minute warning here, and I really like to use everybody's time as well as possible. I hope we've done justice to 45 minutes of your day. That's our goal here. If we did not answer your questions, make sure that you send us an email and we will answer them. So then my apologies, but I hope we at least opened up the topic to asset stewardship, asset taxonomy, what all those things mean, and why they're so important in a successful compliance environment.
Thank you. That was very informative. Learned a lot.
You're welcome. We'll share this presentation back out with you after we wrap up.
Thank you, Ted. Have a nice day.
Yeah, nice talking to you, Eric. Paul, thanks for the question.
Thanks, I wish I could have caught the whole thing. I got in on the end there. So, but thank you for your time, Ted.
No, thank you. Appreciate you guys. We love doing this, so it's good. Yeah. Plus, it gives Steve and I a chance to disagree publicly. It's our second favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
I'll start throwing mud in there so you guys can go at it.
Oh, it doesn't take a lot to motivate us. All right, everybody. Thank you very much.